And welcome everybody to the PCS Like a Pro show. I'm your host, Megan Harless, as always, and we've got a really great show today. I'm really excited to talk about the topic that we're going to discuss. Before we get into all of that, just want to remind everybody, as you know, if you're moving, we are in peak season. It's a little crazy. It's a little hectic out there. If you are one of our Army families, if you were expecting the PCS late August, September timeframe, you are probably getting caught in what they are calling the brownout because the Army is transitioning some systems. And so the system that they use to kind of track PCSs on their side has to come offline to be able to put the new system online. And so a lot of folks are going to get caught in what they're calling the brownout, and they're only allowing those folks with event-driven PCSs to PCS. So usually if it's like a hardship tour, a compassionate reassignment, a change of command, a schoolhouse, a medical needs type of move. So if you fall into those categories, you should be able to continue your PCS as scheduled. If you do not fall into any of those categories, you will probably be not allowed to PCS until October 15th, I believe, is the date when everything will resume as normal. So August 15th to October 15th. If you've got questions about that, reach out to the office, to usually the S1 office, HRC, the person that cuts your orders, and discuss it with them. If you've got a unique family situation going on that you need to handle something, reach out, discuss it with them, and they can be able to assist you through that as well. But like I said before, I'm really excited for today. We've got Crystal joining us, and we're going to be talking about our children and PCSing and their transition and like the pain and the grief and everything that goes along with it. Because a lot of times we PCS, we handle everything with our house, getting from one location to the other, arriving, trying to get stuff unpacked. And sometimes we kind of forget all of the stuff that goes into it and how it impacts our children and what they go through. So we're going to be talking about all of that good stuff today. So Crystal, welcome to the show. I'm so glad you could join us today.
Thank you so much. I feel like like I said, when I met you in May, I was like, oh my God, it's like I'm meeting a celebrity. It's so exciting to one, just to be on the show, two, to be in the presence of someone that's been just moving the needle so much on providing resources and support for our family members as they PCS, not just Army spouses, but all branches. I'm a Navy spouse, and I just appreciate what you do and the investment and the energy you bring into this crazy thing that we do.
Yes, it's so crazy. So thank you for joining us. Can you just take a minute and tell everybody watching just a little bit about yourself?
Yes, so I'm a Navy spouse. I'm also a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm a gerontologist. So what is that? Gerontology is not just aging. Everyone thinks that I only deal with old people, and oh my gosh, you're only dealing with like the above 65, above 85 crowd. When really gerontology is the study of life, right? Birth to death. So I always say that, it's just really studying human behavior and studying aging. And we start aging from the moment we're born.
Yeah, no, absolutely. A very interesting background and topic of what you study. I've never really met somebody that's had, that kind of knowledge background of what it is you study and what you do. So I'm really excited about it. So with this topic, let's kind of baby step through it just a little bit. So thousands of service members and their families will PCS every year. Many of them, it may not be their first PCS, and many of them are going to have children. And at some point, we like to believe that we become a seasoned PCSer. We feel like at some point we've got it down to a science. We know how things go. We know what to expect. But we have to understand that PCSing is more than just moving our household goods from one point to the other. And we've all dealt with the hard transitions at some point. So in general, like, why do we always feel so much like grief and stress when it comes to just PCSing in general?
Well, I think understanding what grief is, and grief is just a normal response to a loss. And so oftentimes we tend to categorize grief into like a death, right? Again, we have all these myths really that we put into what grief is and how we deal with grief without recognizing that, there's over 40 different kinds of losses. So anytime we have I'll use the example of like, hey, I have orders and this is where I'm going. So I make all these plans. And then there's this thing called the Ordman, where you have this modification to your orders, and now you're not going to San Diego. Now you're going to Florida, and that's a loss, right? And we need to acknowledge that that's a loss. So there's, again, over 40 different types of losses that create that feeling of grief. And as a grief recovery specialist, that's really what I specialize in really understanding and also helping people kind of work through, because we have grief that can start, our earliest memories of a loss, maybe a loss of a family pet, or a loss of a grandmother, or a move. Children and adults, we're constantly grieving, and no one is exempt from loss, and no one is exempt from grief. We all have grief that we're carrying.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we got Paulette joining us. Hey, Paulette, glad you're here. And then we got Heba, who, like me, never knew what all of this was. So it's something, we learn something new every day. And I'm glad that we have Crystal here to kind of share about all this with us. If anybody watching, if you guys got questions, drop them in the comments. If Crystal's able to answer them, she will. If not, we'll track down the answers for you and get the answer back to you. But I think that's important to realize too. I mean, when we think of grief and that loss, we usually think of we're grieving a family member, somebody that passed away. But sometimes you don't realize that loss is just other things in our lives. So our friends when we move away, our routine, our school, our community, or whatever. But there's, as you said, all those different types, which, I think sometimes we all forget about until we're in it. And it's just I could have maybe prepared for this a little bit better. Why didn't I?
Exactly. And that's where it comes down to, what we do as military families and military spouses, and of course our kids, and even our pets, is that we pick up everything and we move, which is so common to us. Mm-hmm. But, for the civilian counterparts, they can't even fathom, right? But we just do it. And then I think where it gets a little dangerous is we were well, we always do this, and this is what we do. And it's fine because this is what we do. And we don't acknowledge that that every move is different.
Yeah,
right?
No, it absolutely is. I remember there was an article that I was writing, and it was about our children, transitioning schools and what it's like starting a new school. And so I kind of did an interview with my own children. I asked them, I'm how does it feel starting another new school? And my oldest, his response was this is just what we do. So part of me, I was torn with how to feel about that response from him, because it's just one, I appreciate that he understands this is what life is due to his dad's, chosen career and profession, and, what our lifestyle has become, and that he understands that. But at the same time, my heart broke a little bit. This is just what we do. He doesn't have that normal, what we consider maybe a normal experience of being able to stay someplace for several years and, make those lifelong friendships and put those roots down, that he won't have that experience. But to make it as, this is just something we do should not be just that kind of response that we kind of just fall into.
Exactly. And kids are so good at coming out of left field with these ideas and these feelings, and they just knock us over, right? Because they're oh, I didn't think about that. How do I respond to that? So, not only are they dealing with the PCS moves, but I was thinking this morning about, a lot of kids, not a lot, but, I think there's a significant amount of kids that this is now their second pandemic move, right? So they're we're moving into summer of year 3. So they might have moved that initial 2020. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking back to my own 9-year-old who, when we went on spring break this year, she was is the school going to be open again when I get back? And I was what's she talking about? But it was her first year back in a normal school year. And her only other memory was 2020 of going on spring break and then not coming back into school. So she was carrying a little bit of grief. Mm-hmm. And that was her memory, right? So then that memory and that grief became the truth. And that became all she knew, because she didn't have anything else to kind of compare it to. So it's so interesting how kids come up with these ideas. And a lot of these ideas are based off of kind of some of these, what we call grief myths, mm-hmm. right? And we probably even have them as well. Myths that kind of get put out into the world. I don't think they're ever put out into the world intentionally to hurt anyone, but they're very much there, like, and you might have lost a pet as a child or a goldfish, and the automatic response from so many adults is, it's okay, we'll get another dog.
Yeah.
Right. And when we do that, we kind of put this like myth out there that, well, that's just what you do. But then when there's like a more significant loss,
you can't just go get another grandma.
You can't get another grandma. So, it creates all these like really questionable, like, gosh, can I talk about this? And ultimately we're just not talking about it then because, we just kind of put it off. Like, it's okay. Here's that myth. And it creates that moment of, can I talk to an adult about this? And you did such a great job in validating your child, and talking about it, but also having that understanding that children are going to have like a zillion other ways of interpreting things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. So for those of us with children, like, we are handling through this transition, not only like our grief and our transition of things, but also our children, and also, trying to help understand what they're experiencing at their level and at their age. So what are some components of this moving process that can trigger the grief in children that maybe we can be more aware of or be able to look out for, to be able to try to maybe catch something before it causes something?
This is such a good question. And actually there's a great book. So, I'll kind of go back to where my formal training came in the grief world. Mm-hmm. It came from John James and Russell Friedman. And in any group I ever see that asks about grief, I'm always like, this is like these are the experts in grief, right? Mm-hmm. But then they also partnered and brought up a book, which is When Children Grieve. I'm like, where am I here with my camera? And partnered actually with Dr. Leslie Landon Matthews. I don't know if you ever, Michael Landon, if you're familiar with Michael Landon, Little House on the Prairie. I feel like I'm teaching myself. But they partnered with her and really kind of honed in on helping children with grief. And I think, obviously there's the book out there, but then there's some other components. And just like what you did is where we're kind of predicting what are kids going to go through? So what's their emotional check-in, so to speak? And we're really good at doing checklists. Maybe it's our Excel documents, it's our checklists, like where the kid's going to go to the school, what paperwork, what immunizations, where are we going to live? How are we going to get there? All of those things. And we're doing a really good job as adults of walking through all those steps with our PCS binders. And, again, this is what we do, right? But I think bringing it home to the kids and having them have an opportunity to talk about how do they get to school, right? Mm-hmm. And how do they, how are they going to make friends, and kind of going through that. So sitting down, even just as a spouse or while you're driving across country, or you have like a 5-second moment of free time, writing down like, what do I think my kids might need in this moment as far as understanding this loss. So what was their day-to-day like in our last duty station? How did they get to school? How did they make friends? How did they, get to after school activities? What part of the community were they in? And then kind of thinking about what will they be doing in this next duty station? And then kind of projecting their feelings, right? Because again, they're really good at discussing these feelings when we give them a chance to do it. But if we can kind of think about it as well, and then sit down with them. And I think it's very magical to give a child a blank piece of paper and a crayon and just sit down and say like, hey, do you have any questions? And, hey, let's talk about how you're going to get to school, and just kind of putting that out there so those emotions are in a place in which we can answer them without them having these myths that are going to get put in there because maybe they think we're too busy, right? We're unpacking boxes, or we're stressed, or we're trying to figure out, how we're going to make a meal for a family of 6 in a tiny little hotel, right? So all these things that we're thinking about, and again, putting it out there that let's put an emotional checklist out there too, not just the checklist for all the tangible things, but also the emotions.
Yeah, I really like that, the emotional checklist, to be able to, make sure we're all going towards the same page as to, how we're transitioning and how we're feeling. I just want to hit a couple comments that we have here in the comment section really quick about from Kristen about this being such a good topic. And I mean, as we mentioned before, being wrapped up in the logistics, I think that's something that all of us kind of get to. We focus on the movement from point A to point B, and we're just like, our kids just come along. We just put them in the car and we drive, and it's good. But not always checking in on that emotional side of things. And we got Monica joining us, and her littles are 2 and 8 and having a hard time with their move. Monica's had like a extended vacation of some sort with this PCS. She's had a whirlwind with hers. So finally able to get settled into her house. But I know her kids have made comments before of like, I'm done. I just want to go home. But they were like, between locations, and like, we don't really have a home yet, which adds another level of stress to it all. And then one here from Maria about how she would always have the chaplains come speak to the newcomers orientation and talk about how, it's okay to feel sad and grieve for what you left behind, because it is such a big transition that we go through. And we repeat it every few years as well. So it's not like we can go through it once and be like, oh, we made it, we're good. In a couple of years, we're repeating the process again. And that can sometimes feel just a little tiring. And we get to the point where I think where we feel, a little worn out. And I remember there was one PCS where I told my husband, like, I'm not doing this again. Like, we're done. Like, we're staying here. That's, of course, like 3 or 4 PCSs ago. Obviously, we've kept going. But I think we all get to that kind of like just that point where we just feel done because we've done it so often, and maybe we haven't taken the time to go through that emotional process of transition or grief, and so it weighs on us.
Exactly. And it's so such important comments. And I think again that each grief and each individual is each griever and each loss is so unique, right? So, like, I always compare, I have a 17-year-old, and this is her 15th school. She's going into her senior year. So this is, 15 is it. That's that magic number for her, like her experiences from K to being a senior, from kindergarten to being a senior. And I always talk about her, and her resiliency was so much different than my 9-year-old and our 6-year-old. So how diverse each kid is. And sometimes we're just like, oh, well, the oldest was fine. So this is what we do, and it'll be okay, without recognizing that, again, each loss is so unique and we can't compare, right? So they might have had a different relationship. Maybe this was when my kids left Hawaii in 2021, that was their first experience that they really remembered, that they had that, that intellectual ability to really understand what a move was, but that they had really, really good friends that they were leaving behind. And so it was a little bit of a different move than moving from Bahrain to Hawaii because they're older, so really recognizing that each child is going to have a different significant memory and a significant loss, whether it's leaving a best friend or maybe it was their favorite house. I have a friend who, she said her daughter keeps talking about the blue house. She misses the blue house. It's always it's that little memory that is sticking with them. And I think that's so important to just not only have the emotional checklist for yourself, because we're grieving as well, right? We just picked up and we're losing our best friends, and we're losing our favorite grocery store, and and even the job, our spouse's job. Gosh, that was a really, really good job. I'm going to miss that job. I'm going to miss those people and our command families. But that we're also, checking in and having that emotional checklist really for each member of the family.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So with all of this, how can we help our children kind of manage the stress and this grief that they're going through? And is there anything we can do to kind of help minimize or reduce the grief that comes with the moving?
I think it's there's so many ways. I think one, just talking about it and validating it, right? Talking about, like, I think the most significant thing I can do for my kids is letting them know that I have these feelings too.
Yeah.
Right. one of the myths that we often see and we always hear is, don't feel that way. Here's a donut, right? So like I'm always very, very cognizant of like, hey, let's talk about it. Donuts are fantastic. I love donuts. Don't get me wrong, but that we're able to validate those feelings and talk about those feelings and bring them up so that everyone feels kind of safe in expressing those feelings.
Mhm.
And then I think there's all kinds of resources out there. There's amazing children's books. There's amazing ways to help the kids if they are having a really hard time with that grief. But then there's, like I said, just kind of resources. I'm just going to show you this really quick because it's so genius. But I went to my local library here in Coronado this last week, and I noticed they had check this out. And it's actually a little mental health. It's through mental health initiatives, and it's the Institute of Museums and Library Services, and it's all about anxiety. Like this particular kit is about anxiety.
Oh, cool.
And it talks about how to use the kit. It has little prompts, and then it has different books on all kinds of different resources regarding anxiety. They have one for grief. They have one for sadness. And, again, it's kind of like my kids were so excited. They're like, what's in that backpack? And again, they're 9 and 6 and, talk about feelings a lot, but just giving them moments to have some mindfulness and to really be able to talk about feelings. But also, what's amazing about a library is that there's always a summer reading program, and there's always other kids, and there's other opportunities to kind of start making that new home, right? And again, bringing to light what was your favorite part of your last home? Was it that the house was blue? Well, we can't always paint our house blue like the old house, but can we print out a picture of your old house and put it on the mantle and, remember our old house? And, was it that your house was really close to the library, or that there was a great neighbor? Getting the kids to talk about what was it that made it so amazing? What do they miss about it? And we can't necessarily replace it, but we can validate it. And then we can move into a point where we're like, hey, this is going to be a great adventure, but, I'm here to listen to your feelings.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think talking about it not only helps our children, but also helps us as well in that process of being able to, tell them, what we loved about that location, what we're looking forward to at that next location, to be able to, talk about and express our feelings as well. I know sometimes like my daughter especially is always just like, why are you crying? Like, that's weird. I'm like, well, I'm sad that we're leaving. Like, I had a really good friend here, and we went through all of this, life stuff as a family at this location, and it'll be sad. The way we're leaving is not the way we came in. And so it's sad, to leave that, knowing those life experiences happen there. But knowing that the next location we go to, there's going to be new life experiences that happen and new things that we'll have to get through together as a family. We got a good question here from Tammy. I want to throw up here to ask you is, what do you do if your teen boys don't want to talk about it? And this is a great question because I've got a teen and a preteen, and I can tell you sometimes trying to talk to them and get information out of them is like pulling, teeth out. And sometimes kids just don't want to talk about it. And we know talking can sometimes make it feel better. So what can we do if our child is kind of like in that stonewall phase of like, I don't want to do anything. I don't want to talk. Just let me be.
And I think teenagers are hard. I think, going through several overseas moves with their own teenager, I think it was excruciating. It's very painful for parents as well as teens, but I think just giving them that space. And I think sometimes we get in the mode where we're like, we need to talk about this. And we have our agenda that we want to kind of put on teenagers, right? So maybe we're sitting across the table from them at dinner. We're like, hey, let's talk about how anxious you are about this move. And they might not feel anxious about this move, or they might not have, it might not be the right time for them. So I think stepping back and other activities with them, I think there's a lot to be said for going on a run with teenagers, going on a walk, even there's something to be said about sitting side by side with teenagers versus face to face. So I think just giving them an opportunity in a different environment is good as well, doing an activity. And then I'm a huge fan of just writing notes. Kids love Starbucks. They love Jamba Juice. I love going to get like just a little tiny card and writing a little note and putting it in there saying, hey, I'm here to talk if you need to, and slipping it into their backpack and really creating that environment that they're there. Tammy, I know you are an amazing mom. And I know that it's hard when you're like, I know they're having a problem, but they're not talking about it. And I think as we move into adolescence, that's where it's so important to, look into getting them a mental health provider. If it's contacting Military One Source or going into, some of the different supportive services that we have on bases, are utilizing, even your pediatrician to just bring up some of these conversations. I think, again, kids, for a multitude of reasons, sometimes don't feel comfortable talking with us. And that doesn't mean that we're bad parents. It doesn't mean we're doing anything wrong. It just might mean, that they're carrying grief a little bit differently. So giving them as much support in different ways. There's a great book out there as well. And I know, I think I might have talked to Tammy about it, which is with daughters, but it was a journal that you journal back and forth with your kid. I'll have to look for it and find a link. But it's really cool. And you could even just do it with a plain journal, where you can write back to them and you can let them know, hey, this is a book for us to communicate back and forth. And, you can write, hey, I'm really missing my family. I'm really missing my friends. I miss, this area in which we lived last time. And, if you ever have any questions, you can write them in this book and you can leave it in the room. So it's giving them different ways to communicate without being side by side, sitting down at the dinner table and talking about which for some kids just doesn't feel right. So
yeah, no, absolutely. I'll say that notebook, that journaling back and forth is amazing. I remember being a kid, growing up, me and my mom used to do that. And so our spot was, we would write it and I would leave it at the bottom of the stairs when I would go to bed. And then she would usually leave it at the top of the stairs when I would wake up. Me and my daughter, we have one too, because I told her about that story and she thought it was the coolest thing ever. So she went and found an empty notebook and started it, and now we leave it on each other's pillows after one of us writes in it. And it's a very fun way to be able to have something to look back on. You can look and see what they've gone through and how it's been handled, and just have that kind of sweet memory of having that time together and that communication, that bond. It doesn't always have to be verbally talking, but you're talking to each other through the writing, and that can definitely help and make a difference. We've talked about several resources, one of them being the journal. We've talked about getting chaplains involved, library, summer reading programs. Are there other resources out there that we haven't mentioned that can help children through the transition, and something that we haven't already mentioned that should be mentioned?
I think there's so many resources, so I'm sure there's ones that we missed. Like I said, I really believe in the Grief Recovery Institute. That's another resource where you can go on their website, and you can always find a certified grief recovery specialist in your area, where they do group support as well as one-on-one support. I think, again, all the base services, really connecting with other parents. I think the biggest thing right now is just finding that connection for yourself. And then anytime you can take care of yourself, there's always been the reference of utilizing the oxygen mask first on the airplane, which I think is just tired. So I always just say, you need to charge your device first, right? Mm-hmm. So when you're in a car and you're moving cross country and there's only one charger, the parents have to charge the device first, right? They are the priority. So I think, taking care of you is going to give you the most emotional capacity to take care of your own children. And, again, it's so hard when you're PCSing because no one's sleeping well in a hotel or on these long trips or jet lag, just all the crazy things. So the more that we can take care of ourselves, from eating well to getting that sleep to just that mindfulness, and then really, really diving into self-care. I think I was trying to get on, first my kids logged out of one of the apps, so I can't get back on. But United Through Reading has a great app that's well, where kids can read back and forth through their app. And I was thinking today, gosh, I'm going to utilize that in our next move. So maybe my kids can read to each other. Technology is there. There's so much opportunity for Facebook, for social media, of course, depending on your kids' age, of just being able to connect through electronics, and create those moments of connection.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's a really great book out there called, oh gosh, I want to brain fart on it now. We Move a Lot, and That's Okay. It's written by she was a military child. Her dad was in the Army, I think, retired, and then she became a military spouse. So it's called We Move a Lot, and It's Okay. Her first name is Charmaine, and I'm blanking on her last name, but you can find it on Amazon. And I got it for my kids one time, and it does a really great job of walking through kind of the PCS process at a kid's level. Like, we move a lot, and that's okay. Like, I get to see this place, and I get to see this place, and kind of helping to find some of those joys in the new locations and being able to do all that, which kind of leads to this next question. We got it from Melly. It's here in the comments. It's really long, so I'm just going to read it to you. It says, how do you encourage your kids to find the positives of a new duty station and make friends, even if it is a short-term assignment? My kids are preteen and teen, and this move has been hard for them as they know it will only be a year for school and have said they don't want to bother making friends because saying goodbye in a year will be too hard. I'm having a hard time helping them.
Oof, those are hard. Those are hard moves, and they're hard ages. I think that middle school age is one of the most challenging for my husband and I personally. That was one of the hardest moves that we had, was moving to the Middle East halfway through fifth grade year, and my heart goes out to you because that's very, very challenging. I think there's ways to deal with finding positive and finding good things in really challenging situations is really challenging, right? So how can we? I think with teenagers, sometimes it's getting to be a little like we have to be sneaky, right? And we can't be like I know when I say to my daughter, oh my God, to my now 17-year-old, like, oh, we need to find the positive in this, she's just gonna be like, oh, I roll for this, right? This is not something that she wants to do. But I think that vision boards can be really helpful, and there's different ways to do vision boards with teenagers in which they're just like focusing on other things than just being positive. I think sometimes when we're like, hey, we need to be positive, like that in itself makes a lot of teenagers say, like, I am going to be completely opposite. I'm going to be completely defiant in this. And so finding ways to engage them without it being very intentful, which is really hard. So that's where I go again to like the sneakiness. And, I think, again, sometimes utilizing some of those resources can help, but just putting it out there, like, hey, you're just going to try this, whether it's a youth group or the teen center, and having them focus on things that maybe are really, really important to them versus it, being something that they feel like pressured into. I think anytime teenagers feel pressured into something, they're going to like just automatically be like a magnet and like the opposite magnet, right?
Repel. They're going to repel the force.
Shoot away. And I used the example of my own teenage daughter, and I was like, oh my gosh, you got to get involved. You got to get involved. And finally I backed off, and she somehow got really involved in the Optimist Club. And it was like, I'm sitting in the back just going, oh my gosh, I just want to scream because she's like so involved in this Optimist Club. And this is like my dream come true. Probably, 3 years ago, I would say she's the most pessimistic person in the world, right? But it's really helping them find their own joy. And when we're trying to be really positive about it, it's that automatic repel. So I think putting the resources in, whether it's sports, I've been challenged with this as well with kids that aren't necessarily athletic. It's like, hey, everyone's like, put them in sports, put them in sports. And I'm like, but they hate sports. So this isn't like something that's going to work for us, right? So finding different activities, so finding different things that they're going to radiate towards is so important. And I think too, you had asked the question before, like, how do we prevent this grief from happening? And not that I don't think we can like prevent it, but we can.
But maybe reduce it or help manage it before it
Right.
becomes a bigger, more
Absolutely.
severe issue.
Absolutely. And I think that's where it's, like look at all the different things that is out there. Look at all the different activities, and again, some duty stations are not going to have a lot, right? Like I'm very fortunate I'm living in San Diego. It's this huge, amazing community, but not every duty station is going to be like that. So, maybe really looking into, and that's why I said like some of the vision boards can really get them to kind of get a little creative on like, well, what do you enjoy and what can we do that's enjoyable, that you do enjoy doing. And here's this year, oh my gosh, we have 365 days of you deciding what you want to do. Um, and kind of putting it out there so that they feel invested in it. I think like, how do we create that buy-in for them? And they have to have that buy-in, whether it be sports or, different after school activities. And sometimes, it might have to be online, it might have to be some kind of a course that they're taking from a distance. Anytime you can get them to just invest in something that they enjoy doing, and that's where that positivity just happens.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We got some great advice or comments here in the section. Paulette talking about the whole sports piece of things. Heba talking about music as another option. One thing that my family, what we try to do is make like a new bucket list for each location. We'll sit down as a family and we'll ask them, what do they want to do? We'll Google some of the big attractions around there and, make a bucket list that way they can kind of have, each month try to plan something to do, whether it's a stadium tour. It's like when we were in Texas, we went and we toured AT&T Stadium where the Dallas Cowboys play, and we went and toured the stadium where the Rangers played. We went and did, minor league baseball games, minor league hockey games, all sorts of. Went to a like drive-through safari where there's like giraffes and camels like reaching into the car to take the bucket of feed that we had. That was kind of interesting, but just some of those things. And like, so each month we like, hey, here's a list. What do we want to do this month? So it kind of gives them something, to look forward to and be able to have those memories of, remember that time when we lived here and we went and got to do that, to kind of help it as well. We've also had a few, probably not the best parenting advice that I will ever give, but we had a few times where we've kind of like forced our kids a little bit to do some things or to get involved in some things just to have them do something where they weren't sitting at home on their electronics, on, doing whatever. It's like, let's do the intramural soccer league, just so we can get outside the house and get some fresh air while we do something. Different things like that. And eventually through that process, because we made them do that or the baseball league or whatever on post, they met a friend or two through there when they weren't looking because they were out doing something with other kids their age, the same activity. And, then just those organic friendships start to happen because they're at the same place, same time, doing the same thing kind of deal. Again, probably not the best advice to go force your kid to do something that they may not want to do, but at the time it seemed like the right thing, and they were able, again, to make some friendships and kind of help them get out of that shell, knowing like, well, I met somebody and it's not so bad here.
Yeah, and I think, in San Diego, we have a lot of beach cleanups, and I just like, hey, we're going to a beach cleanup. And you never know who's going to be there. And again, I think sometimes it is getting sneaky. I think it's a lot of bargaining too, right? Like, hey, well, if you come to this, and I think sometimes it's okay to just let them dive into books for a while, or let them have some space in just being. Just kind of being a little isolated and in a little bit of way. I think I think that's an important part of development. For us, it was really challenging because we had a middle school, like I said, halfway through middle school, we went to Bahrain, and I think it was a very challenging time for our teenager. But we found a local art teacher, and we threw her in these summer art camps, and we have all these huge canvas. I feel really bad for the art instructor because I think we kind of put her under because she just kept making these huge, like the whatever we paid for the art camp was not what she spent in all of these like materials, like these huge canvas. She came home with these huge canvas drawings, and it worked. For her, it was an outlet. It was something that she did, and she read a lot. So it was okay, what can we do to support this? And I think coming out of it and going into being an 8th grader in a different country, it was like, oh, it was interesting to have that perspective from her. Saying, wow, I really didn't do a whole lot there, and she realized that, and then that was her motivation to do more with next time we PCS, because it was realization. And then I think it's really important as with preteens and with teenagers that we have parents that we can talk to about it with. Because I think oftentimes as parents, we're really good about like asking for advice when our kids are like potty training or, in those early days of being a parent. And then when we get to stages where our kids are teenagers and preteens, it feels more isolating. So I think having other friends, having other groups, having some mentor moms and dads that you can reach out to and say, hey, how did you get through this? For us, what really, really helped too was having older kids that were military kids that kind of took my daughter under their wing because they got it. So I think a lot of times, some of those teen centers, some of the youth groups, some of the military neighborhoods, there's kids that you can even just say, hey, I know you've been through this, and you never asked, but it just kind of organically happened. Just military kids are really great kids. My daughter would come back and she's like, I was out walking in the neighborhood and someone came up to me and introduced themselves, and she said she totally understood what it was like, so that in itself just validated what she was going through, and it was so powerful. So I think anytime you can find other teenagers that are military kids too, that helps as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it helps too when you move from one military-centric location to another military-centric location, because they're not going to be the only new kid in school that year. There's probably going to be many other new kids that year from new military families moving in. And so they don't have to feel like they're this, standout random new kid person by themselves. They're going to have other military kids with them that are going to be new to the school district, new to the school as well. So they're not going to be in the boat by themselves with that. We've got a question here from Heather in the comments. I'm going to toss up, talking about some of that isolation phase of things. Any suggestions on transitioning from allowing some isolation to encouraging re-engagement, especially with our preteens and teenage children?
Yeah, I think it's just really, trying to figure out where their buy-in's coming from, because otherwise it's going to be so much resistance. So I think, sometimes I hate to like put it back on, oh, hey, go watch a fun movie, like maybe not Breakfast Club, but like, hey, this is part of being a human being, is having some interactions, and being comfortable with interactions. I think a lot of kids, if they were online, they interact differently. So now, how do we work in that re-engagement? And again, I think that goes to creating that buy-in and what's, allowing that space too for them to say, hey, I'm not comfortable doing this, or I'm a little anxious in this, and kind of really providing that space to have more conversations regarding that reintegrating, re-engaging. And I think, moving back to some of those resources, school liaison officers, I know in something that came out from our school liaison officer just recently was that they're going to have an ice cream social before school starts, and that's, again, an opportunity for kids to kind of meet out of the school environment, but, in their local areas. So I think those are creating opportunities again for kids to just kind of meet up a little bit.
Yeah.
In our neighborhood in Hawaii, I know the housing neighborhood itself would host like a preteen or teen mixer.
Mhm.
Just a bunch of parents were like, hey, let's do this. So, even just finding other parents that have,
Mhm.
kids similar ages and creating, sometimes it can be like, mini golf or doing different activities. I think
Mhm.
an activity that's not that's really really engaging, so they don't feel so awkward in that. Thinking about the teenage brain and how awkward it is, and I think back to I never moved at all as a teenager, but there's so much going on. So I think trying to really get into the brains of, hey, this is really really intimidating, just being a teenager itself. Now I'm moving into a new location. And oh, by the way, there was this huge global pandemic. Like, oh, can't forget about that either. And how challenging that was for a lot of kids. And just like I said, a lot of change and a lot of things that weren't normal that now have become normal, right? So just being aware of them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If anybody else has more questions, feel free to drop them into the comments. I just want to pivot a little bit here because you are a military spouse, and so you have PCS experience, and so I just want to touch on that a little bit. So for your family, are you team let the military pack our stuff and move us, or are you team Diddy, let's do it ourselves, and why?
So we've never done a Diddy move, and we've had a lot of Oconus back to Kona, a lot of moves. So I couldn't even fathom getting my things from one country to another. And I think I think we've always just done it that way because I wouldn't even know where to start. I think it was just recently that we even heard what a Diddy move even meant.
Yeah.
So, but that being said, I always pre-pack everything. So like by the time the movers get there, for the majority of, except for our last move from Hawaii in January 2021. I actually didn't. I was up at like 5 a.m. like taking the Christmas tree down because it was like the 26th of December, and I was like very much in denial, and I very much didn't want to move. So that was like probably the most chaotic move, because I did not pre-plan whatsoever. And I think if it was up to me to move myself, I'd never, I would just be like, I'll do it tomorrow. I just keep putting it off. So I need some accountability and people showing up my door and saying, hey, we're doing this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So in all of the locations that you have been to as a family, do you have a favorite or a least favorite DD location, and why?
So we do not have a least favorite. We loved everywhere we've been. I think we really enjoy going to new places. So coming back to San Diego was a little hard because we really wanted to, be somewhere new. But it was also kind of like being home and coming home. So we got to see a lot of family friends that we hadn't seen for quite a while. And I think our favorite, it's really a toss up between Bahrain and Hawaii. I really loved both for very, very, very different reasons. We really love traveling, but my kids miss the beach. And I say that living in San Diego, but miss the beach that they can go to 24/7 and just jump in the water. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then the last question I always like to end with every military spouse I have on this show is, what is a piece of advice that you would want to pass on to others?
Oh, I think my advice for everyone is just to find that connection. I think once we find that connection, whether it's in our community or we find that best friend or our kids find that best friend, once that connection happens, I think it just feels like home. So I think anytime you can, Paulette had posted something about just try something once. And I think that we have to encourage ourselves to do that as well, whether it's going to a family readiness group, going to a spouse event, or going to, like I mentioned, the library before, even just going to a community event, just going once and finding finding that spark of connection, because I think it makes a huge difference. And so getting out there and finding that connection.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And such good words to end today on. Crystal, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us and being able to share the knowledge that you have and helping us learn how to help our children through this transition and the process of grieving what you lose during a PCS. I think we've all have definitely learned something today to be able to help make our next PCSs either easier or to help our children, if you've just PCS, be able to help kind of catch where they're at and try to help them through the rest of this process as well. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. Like I said, I feel like I'm on like the Ellen show. I'm like, and thank you for all that you do. It is it's such an honor to have somebody that I feel like is so devoted to our military families, and we're so appreciative of you, everything you do. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I definitely appreciate that. And everybody else joining us, thank you for joining us. We hope you learned something to be able to help your own children, be able to help yourself through this PCS. Join us next week, same time, same place. We are going to be having, many of you have heard of her, many of you have probably listened to her, many of you probably laugh hysterically at what she provides to our community, but we're going to have military spouse comedian Ashley Gutermuth on next week to kind of help provide us some comedic relief through the PCSing process that many of us have gone through. So definitely join us next week because it's going to be a really great, fun time. Until then, you all enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy the rest of your week. If you're PCSing, we hope it goes smoothly. If you have issues, please reach out. We are happy to help as much as we can and direct you to the places that can give you help as well. So until then, have a great rest of the day, and we'll see you next week.